are going to be doing a series this summer called Expect Miracles. We're going to be looking at John's Gospel, and for those of you who can cast your mind back a whole year, last summer we did the sayings of Jesus. Remember, Jesus said, I am the bread of life, I am the good shepherd, I am the way, the truth, and the life, all of those last summer. Well, there were 7 of those. And also in John's Gospels, there are 7 miraculous signs. And we're going to be looking at some of them over this summer series. And the reason that John structured his Gospel this way, he chose significant things that Jesus said and significant things that Jesus did, all to point to who he was. And so every single one of the miracles that we're going to be looking at was carefully chosen to say something about Jesus. And the miracle that we are going to be looking at this morning is the miracle of Jesus turning water into wine at a wedding. And so I am going to, in a moment, invite the Janaka family who are going to come and read this for us to get us going. And then we're going to do some little activities this morning to help us engage with this story and to understand the significance of why John included this miracle in his Gospel. So, could I have my readers come forward? And we are going to start by engaging with the words of the Bible, of hearing this story, and hearing and understanding, and then we'll go into explaining it a little bit. So, here they come. This is taken from John chapter 2, verses 1 to 11. We're going to put the words up on the screen. These guys are reading from the International Children's Bible version. You're right there. Can you see over the top? You probably can't, can you? No. Okay. Well, here we go. Let's see how they do. Go on.
2 days later, there was a wedding in the town of Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there. Jesus and his followers were also invited to the wedding. When all the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine."
Jesus answered, "Dear woman, why come to me? My time has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you to do." In that place, there were 6 stolen water jars. The Jews used jars like these in their washing ceremony. Each jar held about 20 or 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water." So they filled the jars to the top.
Then he said to them, "Now take some out and give it to the master of the feast." So the servant took the water to the master. When he tasted it, the water had become wine. He did not know where the wine came from, but the servant who brought the water knew. The master of the wedding called the bridegroom and said to him, "People always serve the best wine first. Later, after the guests had been drinking a lot, they serve the cheaper wine, but you have saved the best wine till now."
So in Cana of Galilee, Jesus did his first miracle. There he showed his glory, and his followers believed in him. Amen.
Thank you very much, guys. Thank you so much. So, a wedding. Put your hand up if you have been to a wedding. Yeah. Has anybody been to a wedding in the Middle East? Oh, a couple of people? Great. Anyone been to a wedding in Cana? No. It's actually quite difficult because we're not 100% sure where Cana is because it wasn't actually a massively well-known place. It was a village, probably, and different people have sort of identified it in different areas, and there is now a place where there is a wedding church, and where people think that have sort of identified that this is where it happened. But it's not somewhere, it's not Jerusalem, it wasn't in a big place, it was in a small, relatively unknown village where this wedding took place. And Jesus just happens to get invited. Actually, it was Mary, wasn't it? It was Mary, his mum, who gets invited, and it's like Jesus and the disciples are just tagging along. The Bible tells us Jesus was allowed to invite his disciples, basically. And they turn up, and then at this wedding, there's a problem. And the problem is there's no more wine. Now, I'm not going to comment on whether we would find that a problem or not. But we're just going to think a little bit in the context of that wedding, at that time, at that place. Running out of wine was not just an inconvenience. Wasn't just like, oh, never mind, you can have an orange juice. It was providing wine for your guests was a symbol. It was a symbol of being able to provide for your wife, because the bridegroom would provide the wine. But also it was considered to be a kind of sign of God's blessing. Wine is seen as a sort of symbol of joy and of God's blessing. So the wine running out wasn't an embarrassment, but it was a bit more than that. It was more setting a really bad start to this wedding. And what happens? Mary, Jesus' mum, becomes aware of the situation. We don't know how, but she becomes aware. And she comes to Jesus and she asks him, Jesus, can you do something about this situation that this bridegroom has found himself in? I'm going to pause there, and we're going to pick up the rest of the story in a little while.
There we go. Something a bit fun, but this is our story today, that Jesus was at this wedding. The host had run out of wine, and all that they had was big stone jars that they could put water into. And this wasn't going to be good for everybody to drink. This wasn't going to make a wedding go off with a bang, was it? So there's this context here where Mary, his mother, says to Jesus, please, will you come and do something about this? And we are going to watch a little video of this story and find out now what Jesus did. So, can we run the video?
Jesus went to a wedding at Cana in Galilee. His friends were invited, and so were his family. The party had started as well as could be. People dancing and feasting with joy and great glee. But an awkward predicament soon came about when his mum came to tell him the wine's ran out. If the wine was all gone, then the groom would be blamed. He would start off his marriage embarrassed and shamed. So would Jesus help this disaster pass by? Could he make things much better by finding more wine? Why involve me in this? Jesus questioned his mum, for I tell you my hour has not quite yet come. But she trusted that Jesus would stop this disturbance. Do what he tells you, she said to the servants. Now near to the servants were standing some jars, made for water and washing. These jars were quite large. It was a normal tradition to wash before food, to avoid seeming sinful or guilty or rude. Jesus spoke to the servants, now take those big pots and fill them with water, right up to the top. Then he told them to draw some from one of the jars and to take it away to the person in charge. They did what he said and were startled to find what had started as water had turned into wine. The head of the banquet was shocked and assumed that this wonderful wine was all thanks to the groom. So he called him aside and then marvelled at how he'd waited to bring out the best wine till now. Though the groom had done nothing, no credit to claim, he'd been saved from embarrassment, scandal and shame. And the joy Jesus brought them that day with the wine was far more than it seemed, because this was a sign. Jesus was starting to show us his glory. See, this part is only the start of the story. He'd make all things much better with what he would bring. A new life, a new world, with a life-giving king, where coming to God needs no water or washing. For Jesus himself gives his life as the offering. So all are invited, the great and the least, when he throws his incredible, bottomless feast.
Okay, Jesus couldn't leave the guests without provision. What a wonderful story, and we're going to explore a little bit more about that. Anna's just going to come and explain some of the context of that miracle and what happened. If she's ready.
Yeah, so we left it before, didn't we? That at the point where Mary had come to Jesus and said to him, there's a problem. Here we are, there is no more wine. And in that video, we see really clearly that Jesus then directed the servants, and Mary had told the servants, do whatever Jesus tells you. And he directed those servants to go and fill up some water jars. Now, these water jars were probably about the same height as me. Probably, if we had one here on the stage, I could hide behind it pretty effectively. So they were large water jars that were used for the ceremonial washing of the hands. They weren't even usually used to carry drinking water. They were used to carry water used for washing. And Jesus then directs them, pour out, take some water from those jars and pour it out. And as he does that, people are given wine. And not just any wine, but the very, very best wine. So amazing that the people go to the bridegroom and they say, why have you saved this wine to last? Most people serve the best wine first, and then as people become less observant, they serve the not so good wine. And you've done it the other way round. You have served the very best wine. Now, there are things about this story, and we're going to talk a little bit more in a minute, but there are things about this story that we don't know all the details. There's a bit in it, isn't there, where Mary first goes to Jesus and says, Jesus, you've got to do something about this. There's no more wine. And he sort of says, Mum, why have you come to me with this? It's not my time yet. And then the very next thing we read in the story is Jesus is helping, is turning water into wine. And we don't know what happened in between that, but we do know that Jesus only ever does what his Father says. So I imagine that in that brief moment, Jesus is speaking with his Father, and the Father is saying, yes, this is the time, this is the place. And then the miracle happens. And Matt's going to come now and just share a little bit about sort of some of the meanings and why John included this in his gospel.
So it said earlier that John includes 7 miracles in his gospel. John was one of Jesus' closest friends. He would have seen Jesus do hundreds and thousands of miracles. Nearly every day, Jesus would have been healing people, doing some amazing things. And John chooses 7 of them to put in his story of Jesus. So why did he choose this one? What makes this miracle so special? Because, it's an amazing miracle, isn't it? It is an amazing miracle, turning water into wine. But why did John choose to put this one in? Well, the video gave you a little clue at the end, because Jesus took the water that was used for people to wash their hands. It was ceremonial washing water. It was part of their routine that when they arrived places, as part of their weekly routines, they would wash. It wasn't just about hygiene. It was also to remind them that they were unclean on the inside, that they kept doing things wrong in their life, and so their washing was part of a way of becoming clean before God. It was part of their daily routine. Now, who here has had a wash this morning? I'm looking for some hands down, but okay, good. And you did that because you needed to be clean. When you wake up tomorrow morning, you'll probably find the same scenario, won't you? I need to wash, I need to freshen up for the beginning of a new day. And these ceremonial washing jars, the water that was in them was part of that routine that was also a reminder that they were spiritually unclean and they kept on having to make themselves clean. But the story of Jesus is that in his death and in his resurrection comes about a way by which we don't need to keep going through the routine. of washing. We can come to Jesus once. We can say sorry for the things that we've done. We can receive forgiveness. And all of that religion, all of that routine gets washed away by something even more wonderful. And last week we broke bread together and we shared communion and we talked about how the wine represented Jesus' blood. And here Jesus takes the water that was part of their ceremonial routine and he turns it into wine. And John says, look at the end of the story. Look at who this guy is. This is a sign here that Jesus is the Son of God, that he's the Messiah. He's come to transform everything. He's come to take away that ceremonial ritual and routine, that constant reminder of how dirty and sinful you are. And he's come to give you a permanent place of peace and forgiveness and mercy and grace. And that's why John included this in his gospel. Not just because he was impressed that Jesus was able to turn water into wine, but because it symbolized something of Jesus' life and death and resurrection that was going to be incredibly, incredibly powerful and permanent for everybody. So that's why John included it. But there are also some things that we can take away from this miracle. And this week we're looking at how we should expect miracles every day. And Anna's going to tell us what that means for us. What can we expect? And what should we expect from Jesus now?
Okay, I spoke at the beginning and gave a little bit of a context of what it meant to run out of wine in the time and in the place that we were at. But even with the sort of seriousness of what it was like to run out of wine at that wedding in Cana, it's not really something that we could describe as a life or death situation, in all honesty, is it? It's an embarrassing and difficult social situation, and it had serious implications for the bridegroom, but it wasn't actually going to be something that caused anyone to die, or kind of real sort of serious implications. And in fact, if you think about it, we don't even really know whether a miraculous solution was the only solution that was possible. I mean, we know that Cana was a remote place. It's probably not possible that they could have gone out and found a vineyard that had more wine. But equally, it's not impossible that there could have been a solution that they could have worked out among themselves. They could have asked the guests for a quick whip round, or the ones that the members of the family, and they could have gone and found someone. I mean, we don't know, but we can't rule that out as a possibility. And this week, as I've been thinking about this morning, I've been thinking about the times when I'm faced with a situation that feels impossible. I mean, we were joking with Rob and Sarah and Charlotte about making you all a drink. Sorry, it was a joke. There isn't enough stuff, and we were putting him in a pretty impossible situation, weren't we? Not dissimilar to the situation that the bridegroom found himself in. An impossible situation, and we find ourselves in those kind of situations all the time, don't we? Where we're faced with something that we can't quite work out, or we can't quite work out easily in our own strength, in our own thoughts. And I've been reading this week, I've been reading all about Abraham, and just the amount of times that Abraham tried to work things out by himself and got himself in a real muddle. And I've been reading that and preparing for this and just thinking, there are so many times where I find myself in those kind of difficult situations where I'm more like Abraham and less like Mary. And actually, Abraham tried to sort things out by himself, but Mary went straight to Jesus. And I think it's really easy for us sometimes to think, Jesus will only want to get involved with the really big things in our life, the life and death situations, the things where we know that there is no other way of working it out. But actually, here was Mary, Jesus' mother, probably at this point, the human being who knew Jesus the most. His disciples were getting to know him fairly well, but I'd say Mary was probably still the human who knew him the most at that point. And her instant reaction her assumption was that she could go to Jesus and ask him for help. And Mary was able to do this because she had a unique relationship with Jesus, didn't she? He was her son. But through Jesus' death and his resurrection, we have a unique relationship with Jesus too. And because of that unique relationship, we can go to Jesus. We can go to Jesus with the really big things in our lives, but we can also take to Jesus the everyday situations, things that aren't life or death, but things that are causing us difficulty. And we can be like Mary in our boldness, and we can go to Jesus. Now we know that as we do that, Jesus is going to act always in accordance with the will of his Father. So it's not like we don't have sort of a magic machine in Jesus, but we do have a friend, a saviour, a brother who we can go to, and we can approach Jesus, we can approach God because of what Jesus has done, because of what Matt spoke about a moment ago. And I just want to challenge us this morning that is going to Jesus in our situations, whether that's something in our health, with our family, whether it's a situation at work. Is that our first instinct? Do we have the boldness to go as Mary did to Jesus? Because let's look what happened when Mary took that step. First of all, the need was met. The wine was plentiful. The need was met extravagantly. It wasn't just any old wine. It was the very best wine. Jesus had provided through this miracle the very best solution to the problem. And thirdly, the Bible tells us that Jesus was glorified as a result of this miracle. Jesus was glorified in front of all of the people. It says in John's Gospel, this is the moment when the disciples believed in Jesus. Mary was actually not asking for this miracle for herself, was she? She was asking for it on behalf of friends or family members. She was asking for it in front of her family who didn't yet know who Jesus was. And as they saw Jesus act, this led to Jesus being glorified, not just in Mary's life, not just in the disciples' life, but in the lives of everybody who was at that wedding. Because Mary had asked for Jesus to act in that situation, in her difficulty, he was glorified, and his name would have been shared among all those guests that were there. So, my challenge this morning, for me personally, and I'm hoping that this is a little bit of a challenge for you too, is let's be those who take our problems and situations to Jesus as our first instinct. And also, let's be those who do that on behalf of our friends and our family. Let's invite Jesus into those everyday situations, and let's have an expectation that he can provide the situation miraculously. I had a situation at work a couple of weeks ago where I'd met a family that we were going to be supporting. I work for an organisation called Safe Families, and part of my role is to meet with families, and then we identify volunteers who can support those families. And I met with this man who shared his story with me, and I was really heartbroken, actually, listening to his story. And he said to me, we asked them, we call it the miracle question, if you could change, if one thing in your life could change, what would you choose? And he said, I just want to do something normal. I just want to go out and have a coffee with someone. And as I was sitting there, I was thinking to myself, this is a really simple ask, but I'm not sure we have the right volunteer for this man, because he's a man. Lots of our volunteers are women. He's a little bit older. He's got some quite significant mental health issues. And as I was there, I just felt God really speak to me and say, you need to pray for this man and you need to pray for this situation. Don't go rooting through all your list of volunteers and trying to make this match. Just pray. And the next Saturday, I was involved in a training session with some new volunteers. And as I was there, this man came in, kind of in his early 60s, about the same age as the man that I'd been to meet. And he started to talk to me about his background. And as I was talking to him, everything he said just said to me, this is the man, this is the perfect match for this man. This was a man that this volunteer was a completely new volunteer, not somebody we had on our radar at all. And it just reminded me, this is an everyday situation for me. This is something that I'm dealing with in work. And sometimes I work for a Christian organisation, but even within that, I can forget to bring things to Jesus. And when I did, that situation turned around. And there's hope now in that situation. And I'm praying for the outcome. And I hope one day I'll be able to share a testimony of a brilliant outcome from that volunteer supporting that man. But I'm sharing that as just an encouragement to you that when you are facing situations in your work life, in your home life, that might just seem just mundane, run-of-the-mill, Jesus is interested. He wants you to take those things to him. And he wants to be able to act in our lives and our friends' lives when we open ourselves up to him and expect him to do that. And Matt's just going to come and share now a way that we can respond together.
Yeah, so we'd just like everybody just to take a moment to reflect and respond this morning. Our theme this morning is expecting miracles. That's our theme for the summer, but it's about expecting miracles in every day. In those situations where maybe you just thought, well, that's the way it is, it's not going to change. Or the times where we just work a bit harder and keep Jesus at arm's length. And this morning there's an invitation from Jesus to say, don't leave me out of everyday life. I can do some pretty amazing things in your everyday life.